Driving a truck at night gets predictable in a way most people wouldn't expect. After enough years on the road, the job becomes a series of habits that run in the background. Your eyes move between mirrors without thinking. You watch the shoulder, the lane lines, the distance to the next set of headlights. Even when the road is empty, part of your mind keeps scanning for things that don't belong. Most nights, that instinct just keeps the trip smooth. You notice debris early. You slow before traffic bunches up. You spot a blown tire on the shoulder before you're right on top of it. The routine works because the road usually behaves the way you expect it to. But sometimes the thing your eyes catch isn't random. Sometimes it's something someone placed there. I learned that one night in July of 2018 while running a late route on Highway 285 outside Carlsbad, New Mexico. The road was empty, the truck was running fine, and the shift had been quiet for hours. Then my headlights caught a faint glint of metal scattered across the lane ahead. At first, I thought some scrap had fallen off a work truck. That happens. Chain links, broken tie-down hardware, bits of metal off a trailer. Out there, especially with oil field traffic, you see all kinds of junk on the road. But as I closed the distance, something about it didn't sit right. The pieces weren't gathered in one natural scatter the way road debris usually is. They looked spaced, not perfectly, just enough that my foot eased off the throttle before I had fully made sense of why. That's another thing people don't understand about driving a truck. A lot of the important decisions happen half a second before the explanation. Your body catches the pattern before your conscious mind builds the sentence. I came off the throttle, covered the brake, and brought my high beams up with a little more focus. The metal flashed again. This time I could see there were multiple objects spread across my lane and part of the shoulder. Low profile, dark, hard to read except where the headlights caught an edge. I started braking harder, but not hard enough to lose control. A loaded truck doesn't forgive panic. You don't stomp and hope. You manage weight, distance, and the possibility that the thing you're avoiding might not be the only problem. The truck slowed with that deep forward pressure you feel through the seat and steering column. I kept it straight, checked the mirrors, and watched the road. There was nobody behind me close enough to become a second emergency. That helped. I brought the rig down enough that by the time the objects were fully in the beams, I had room to stop without rolling over them. What I saw made me sit up straighter in a way I still remember. They were spikes, not commercial caltrops or anything professionally made. Homemade, rough little welded pieces with nails and sharpened metal set in angles so at least one point would stand upright no matter how they landed. There were enough of them to ruin multiple tires if I had driven through. And they hadn't ended up there by accident. They were spread in a line across the lane with just enough irregularity to look random from a distance. I brought the truck to a complete stop short of them and kept my hands on the wheel. The engine idled. The headlights washed the road ahead. For a few seconds, that was all there was. Then I started checking everything else. Mirrors first, driver's side, passenger side, then farther out beyond the road where the shoulder fell into brush. That's when I noticed the lights. Off to the right, beyond what passed for a shoulder in that area, there was a dim set of headlights tucked low behind scrub and mesquite. Not on the highway, off it, positioned at an angle that suggested a vehicle was sitting in the brush or at the mouth of one of those little dirt access cuts. I hadn't noticed them a moment earlier because they were faint and partly masked. As I stared at them, they went dark. Not driving away, not shifting, just turned off. If I had still been trying to convince myself the spikes might be random debris, that ended it. I stayed where I was and locked my doors again even though they were already locked. There's a point in situations like that where the problem stops being the thing directly in front of you and becomes the shape around it. The spikes were only useful if they forced me to stop. The lights in the brush told me stopping had always been the point. I reached for the radio and keyed up, giving my location as precisely as I could. I also got my phone in hand, though I didn't fully trust coverage in that stretch. Some places out there you'll have enough signal to think you're fine until the call drops. Dispatch answered on the radio before the phone became relevant, and I told them there were tire spikes spread across the highway and suspicious activity off the shoulder. My voice sounded flatter than I felt. which is normal for me when something is wrong. The more serious it gets, the less dramatic I get. They told me to stay in the cab and that they'd notify law enforcement. That was the obvious advice, but hearing it from someone else helped settle the next decision, which was whether to get out and try to clear the road myself. I had no intention of doing that. You don't step down into a setup if you don't have to. I clicked on every light I had that would help. High beams, marker lights, work lights. I wanted as much of that scene exposed as possible. The road ahead lit up hard. The spikes stood out more clearly now. Ugly little metal shapes against the asphalt. The brush beyond the shoulder stayed mostly black. I kept looking for movement, a door opening, a person shifting position, a flashlight, anything. Nothing obvious. That almost made it worse, because if people are visible, you can at least measure them. When they stay hidden, you're left trying to guess where the edges of the problem are. A minute or two passed that felt longer than it probably was. Then I saw something else. Not a person, just a slight movement in the brush line where the headlights from my truck reached their farthest edge, a branch bending and then settling back in a way that suggested weight against it. Someone was out there, or more than one person. I kept the truck in gear and my foot ready. I wasn't trapped exactly, but I wasn't in a good spot either. The shoulder was narrow and soft. Going forward meant driving through the spikes. Going straight back with a trailer in darkness on a highway shoulder is its own problem. A truck isn't a pickup. You don't just throw it in reverse and vanish. Still, staying put indefinitely wasn't an option either. I checked the mirrors again and started thinking through the geometry. Roughly 100 yards behind me, there had been a wider patch near one of the dirt oil access roads. Not a formal turnaround, but possibly enough room to back and angle out if I could get there without putting the trailer in a ditch. That became the plan. I released the brake carefully and let the truck creep back. Slow, controlled, eyes moving constantly between the mirrors, the road edge, and the dark shoulder. Backing a truck in daylight takes attention. Backing one on a remote highway shoulder at night with people potentially in the brush nearby changes the whole feel of it. I moved maybe 10 feet before I stopped again and scanned. The dark stayed dark. Then, behind me in the left mirror, I saw a brief flicker. Not my own lights, a reflection from something farther back and off to the side. Another vehicle maybe, or the same one repositioning where I couldn't directly see it. That told me I needed to keep moving. I backed farther, taking it in small sections. Pause, scan, back again. The truck responded the way it should. The trailer stayed lined up well enough. I was hyper-aware of every inch of shoulder, because if the right side dropped too far, I'd be dealing with a stuck rig on top of everything else. While I was backing, I saw a shape cross the road ahead near the spikes. It was quick and low, and could have been someone bent forward moving from one side to the other. I can't swear to the exact posture because I only caught it at the edge of the beam, but it was not an animal. The movement was too directed. I did not stop to study it. I kept backing. At some point, I reached the wider patch I had remembered. It wasn't generous, but it was enough. There was an oil field access cut angling off to the right, and the highway shoulder opened just enough that I could start working the truck around. This was the worst part physically, because turning a big rig around in limited space at night requires commitment. You are making a series of decisions that all depend on the last one not being wrong. I pulled forward into the wider area, cut the wheel, watched the trailer, corrected, backed again, and felt the tires bite uneven gravel. The whole time, I expected headlights from the brush to come on and rush me. They didn't. That doesn't mean no one was there. It just means they didn't want to expose themselves once the stop didn't go the way they planned. When I got the truck turned enough to head back the way I came, I didn't waste time. I straightened out and drove. Not recklessly, but with enough force behind it that I wasn't offering a second chance. As I passed the area where I had first seen the hidden headlights, nothing lit up. No chase, no vehicle pulling onto the road behind me, just brush and darkness. I kept checking the mirrors anyway. A few miles back, I reached a better lit junction with more room and pulled over only enough to update dispatch and confirm officers were headed toward the location from the other direction. They told me to remain where I was until contacted. When law enforcement arrived, I repeated everything exactly as I've said it here. Glints on the road, homemade spikes, headlights in the brush going dark, possible movement near the trap while I was backing out. The officers took it seriously, which mattered. One of them later told me they recovered multiple spike devices from the lane and shoulder. He said they were handmade and that, in his opinion, they were placed intentionally to disable a vehicle. They didn't find anybody in the brush. They did find evidence that a vehicle had recently been off the road in one of the dirt cuts, but nothing that gave them a clear answer on who had been there. That's usually how those stories end in real life, not with an arrest while you're standing there, just enough proof to confirm you were right not to step down. I finished the route later, after the highway was cleared and after I'd had time to let my shoulders unclench. The truck was fine. I was fine. That's the official version. The less official version is that for a long time after that, every metallic glint on a dark road made my attention narrow immediately. A soda can tab, a piece of chain, a bit of reflective trash. My eyes would catch it and my body would be halfway into a decision before my brain named it. That's not a complaint. It's what the job asks of you. But that night outside Carlsbad changed the way I thought about one thing. Before that, if I saw a disabled vehicle or debris on a remote stretch, I treated the problem in front of me as the main problem. After that, I started treating the thing in front of me as possibly the opening move. Because those spikes weren't there to damage tires for the sake of damage. They were there to make a truck stop in the exact kind of place where a driver would have to choose between stepping out and staying put. And the part that still works on me is how quickly those lights went dark once they understood I had seen enough. People imagine truck drivers constantly talking on the radio or blasting music to stay awake, but a lot of us don't. After a few years on the road, the quiet becomes part of the routine. The engine noise settles into the background, the tires hum along the pavement, and your mind just moves with the miles. Night runs especially feel that way. The highways out in Nevada can stretch so far without seeing another vehicle that it almost feels like the road belongs to you for a while. The lights from towns come hours apart. Gas stations are few and far between. Sometimes the only proof anyone else exists is the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite lane. That's what the road felt like in September of 2020 when this happened. I was hauling produce south through Nevada on US 93, running a refrigerated trailer full of lettuce and packaged vegetables, headed toward distribution farther down the line. It was a routine load. Nothing special about it, just something that had to move quickly so it stayed fresh. The trailer unit hummed steadily behind me, keeping the temperature locked where it needed to be. The cab was cool, the road was clear, and I had been driving long enough that the night had settled into that steady rhythm where the miles pass without much effort. I had just crossed through a stretch outside Ely where the land opens up into wide, dark valleys with mountains sitting like black walls in the distance. Out there, the road cuts straight for long stretches. Your headlights disappear into darkness until they catch the next reflective marker. Traffic was almost non-existent. I had maybe seen 2 vehicles in the last half hour. That's why the figure on the shoulder caught my attention right away. At first, it was just a shape standing near the edge of the road, partially lit by my headlights as I came closer. A man. He had one arm out slightly like someone hitchhiking. My first reaction was the same one most drivers have. Keep going. Every trucking company tells you not to pick people up. It's written into safety rules, and it's something drivers remind each other about all the time. Picking up strangers on the highway can go wrong in a lot of ways, so I drove past him. For a few seconds, the headlights washed over him, and then he disappeared into the darkness behind the truck. Normally, that would have been the end of it, but something about the situation stuck with me. The guy didn't look drunk. He didn't look like someone who had been wandering the road for days. He was standing upright, calm, almost like he expected a ride eventually. And the stretch of road we were on wasn't exactly close to anything. The nearest town in either direction was a long walk. I kept driving for another minute or so while the thought bounced around in my head. Someone stranded out there at night could be in real trouble. Temperatures drop fast in the desert after dark, and if his vehicle had broken down miles away, he might not have had many options. Against my better judgment, I eased off the throttle. The truck slowed gradually. I checked my mirrors, signaled, and pulled onto the wide gravel shoulder about a quarter mile ahead of where I'd seen him. For a few seconds, I just sat there watching the dark road in the side mirror. Eventually, I saw a small figure moving along the shoulder toward me. He walked at a steady pace, not running or waving his arms the way someone desperate usually would. When he reached the passenger side of the cab, he looked up at me through the window. He was maybe mid-30s, thin build, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hair was short and messy like he'd been traveling for a while. I cracked the passenger window. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "South," he said. His voice was calm. No panic, no excitement. "Closest town down the road," he added. I thought about it for a second. The next real truck stop with lights and people was about 40 minutes away. If I dropped him there, he'd at least have somewhere safe to figure out his next move. "All right," I said. "Hop in. I'll take you to the next stop." He climbed into the passenger seat without saying much. The door shut with a solid thud, and I eased the truck back onto the highway. For the first couple minutes, we drove in silence. I expected the usual small talk people make when they get a ride. Questions about where I was headed, how long I'd been driving, things like that. Instead, the first thing he asked was this: "What are you hauling?" I shrugged slightly. "Produce." "What kind?" "Vegetables, mostly," I said. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking about something. Then he asked another question. "Worth a lot?" That made me glance over at him. Not a dramatic glance, just a quick look to see if he was joking. His face didn't change. "Depends," I said. "It's a full load." He leaned back in the seat and looked toward the windshield. "How much do you think a load like that is worth?" That was a strange line of conversation for someone who had just gotten picked up on the side of the road. Most hitchhikers ask how long until the next stop or where you're headed. They don't start asking about cargo value. I kept my eyes on the road. "Enough that it needs to get delivered," I said. He nodded again. A minute passed. Then he asked another question. "Anyone know exactly where you're going tonight?" That one sat heavier. "Dispatch knows," I said. "Live tracking or just check-ins?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. The questions were getting specific in a way that didn't feel casual anymore. Like if you stopped somewhere unexpected, would anyone notice right away? I looked over at him again. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching the road ahead like he was thinking out loud. "Why do you ask?" I said. He shrugged. "Just curious." The cab felt smaller suddenly. A semi-truck has a lot of space physically, but when you're inside it with someone you don't know, the distance between the seats doesn't feel very large. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel. "Next stop's about 40 minutes, I said. He nodded. For a while, neither of us spoke, but I could feel him occasionally glancing toward the dashboard and the log screen. Then he asked another question. "You ever change stops if you get tired?" "Sometimes," I said. "Like pull off somewhere random?" "Not usually." He leaned forward slightly. "Anyone expecting you at a certain time?" That was the point where I stopped answering completely. The truck continued rolling down the dark highway while the refrigerated unit hummed behind us. The headlights stretched across empty pavement. I started planning. There was a large truck stop up ahead with bright lighting and a fuel island that stayed busy even late at night. If I pulled into the main area instead of the back lot, there would be cameras and other drivers around. That's where this ride was going to end. The hitchhiker didn't ask anything else for a while, but I noticed his eyes moving around the cab more now. The radio, the door locks, the log tablet. Finally, the glow of the truck stop appeared ahead in the distance, bright white lights rising above the dark highway. I took the exit ramp and rolled toward the fuel island instead of the parking lot. The place was busy enough that several other trucks were already fueling. I slowed the truck and pulled to a stop near the front of the building where the lights were strongest. Then I set the brake. "All right," I said. "This is your stop." The man didn't move. He looked out the windshield toward the building. "Thought you said 40 minutes, he said. "Close enough," I replied. "You can grab food or call someone here." He stayed in the seat. "Maybe I'll ride a little farther," he said. "No," I said calmly. "This is where you get out." He turned his head toward me. For the first time since he got in the truck, his expression changed slightly. Not angry, just calculating. "Road's long tonight," he said. "You sure you don't want the company?" I reached over and unlocked the passenger door. Then I opened my own door and stepped down onto the pavement. The noise of other trucks and diesel engines filled the air around the fuel island. I walked around to the passenger side and opened his door. "Ride's over," I said. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he stepped down out of the cab. He didn't argue anymore. He just stood there beside the truck. As I climbed back into the driver's seat, he spoke again. "Nice cargo," he said quietly. Then he walked toward the dark edge of the lot. I locked the doors and sat there for a moment before pulling away. The thing that bothered me afterward wasn't that he asked about the produce. Drivers talk about loads all the time. What bothered me was the order of his questions. Not once did he ask for food. Not once did he ask to use a phone. He didn't ask how long I'd been driving or where I was coming from. Every single question he asked had something to do with the cargo, the route, or whether anyone would notice if something changed. That's when I realized something. The man on the side of the road might not have been trying to get somewhere. He might have just been trying to find out which truck was worth stopping. Driving refrigerated freight teaches you to pay attention to more than just the road. When you're hauling a refrigerated trailer, you're responsible for two things at the same time: the truck and the temperature behind you. The engine can be running perfectly and the road can be clear, but if the trailer unit drops a few degrees outside its range, the entire load can be rejected when you arrive. So you get used to checking things constantly. Road ahead, mirrors, temperature readout. Back to the road. After a few years of that rhythm, you stop noticing you're doing it. Your brain just cycles through the information automatically. That's what I was doing one night in August of 2021, running US 54 outside Liberal, Kansas. It was a pretty typical run for me at the time. I was hauling refrigerated freight east through Kansas with a trailer full of packaged food that needed to stay cold the entire trip. Nothing fragile, but enough value that nobody wanted temperature swings. The reefer unit behind me had that steady mechanical hum it always has when it's running right. Inside the cab, everything felt normal. Gauges steady, cruise control set, headlights pushing through the darkness in that long, bright tunnel trucks create on empty highways. The road out there is mostly flat farmland and long, straight stretches of asphalt. At night, it can feel almost empty. Every now and then, a pickup passes the other direction, but there are long minutes where you see absolutely no one. I had been driving through one of those stretches when I saw the minivan. It was sitting on the shoulder ahead with its hazard lights flashing. From a distance, it looked like exactly the kind of situation drivers see all the time. Someone broken down, maybe a family traveling late, maybe someone who ran out of gas and managed to coast onto the shoulder. The flashing lights reflected off the road in a steady rhythm. As I got closer, I noticed someone standing beside it, a woman. She was waving both arms toward the road. The movement was frantic enough that it caught my attention immediately. Most people who break down don't stand out in the road waving like that unless they're worried something is really wrong. I checked my mirrors automatically. No vehicles close behind me. That's the first thing you do when you think about slowing a truck. You need to know what's happening behind you before you make any decisions. The lane behind me was empty. I started easing off the throttle, not braking hard, just letting the truck slow gradually. At that distance, the scene still looked normal enough. The woman kept waving her arms. The minivan's hazards blinked steadily. My brain started doing the same calculations it always does in those moments. If someone's stranded out here at night, there's a good chance they don't have help coming soon. Cell service in that part of Kansas can be spotty. The nearest town might be miles away. A truck driver stopping long enough to ask if they need a call made isn't unusual. But at the same time, drivers are trained to be cautious. You don't just jump out of the cab without looking carefully. I was maybe 100 yards away when the first detail didn't fit. The woman was standing farther from the van than most people would if they were dealing with a breakdown. Usually people stay close to the vehicle, leaning against it, looking under the hood. She was almost in the lane, still waving. I slowed a little more. My headlights spread wider across the shoulder. That's when I saw the shadows. Two shapes crouched low behind the minivan. They were positioned near the back bumper on the side, facing away from the road. At first, they looked like dark lumps against the vehicle, but then one of them shifted slightly. People. They were crouching low enough that they were almost invisible until the angle of the headlights changed. The realization hit instantly. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a setup. By the time that thought finished forming, the truck had already slowed more than I liked. A loaded semi doesn't regain speed instantly, and whatever those two men were planning probably depended on me slowing enough to stop beside the van. The woman was still waving, but now that I knew what I was looking at, the whole scene looked different. Too deliberate, too staged. I pressed the accelerator instead of the brake. The engine responded with that deep growl you feel through the seat. The truck began picking up speed again. As I passed the minivan, I kept my eyes straight ahead instead of turning my head toward them. But I caught enough movement in my peripheral vision to see the woman step quickly away from the road. The two men behind the van stood up. The moment I cleared the vehicle, I checked the mirror. The change was immediate. The woman stopped waving. She moved fast toward the driver's door of the van. One of the men jumped into the passenger side. The minivan's hazards went off. A second later, the headlights came on. Then the van pulled back onto the road. My stomach tightened. They were coming after me. The van accelerated quickly, closing the distance between us faster than I liked. A semi-truck loaded with refrigerated freight doesn't jump forward like a car. It builds speed gradually. The van was much lighter. I grabbed the radio microphone and called out my location. My voice sounded calm enough, but inside my head, everything had shifted into a much sharper focus. The highway stretched straight ahead through open farmland. No towns, no lights, just the occasional dirt road cutting away from the pavement. In the mirror, the van grew larger. They weren't backing off. They stayed several car lengths behind the trailer, matching my speed. I pushed the truck faster. The reefer unit hummed behind me. The engine pulled steadily, and the speed climbed. But the van kept its distance. Still there. The headlights stayed locked in the mirror. I tried to think through what they might be planning. Running me off the road with a small vehicle would be difficult. Trucks weigh too much for that kind of maneuver unless the driver makes a mistake. More likely, they were hoping I'd panic and slow again somewhere less visible, or they were waiting to see if I would stop voluntarily. I kept driving. Eventually, I saw the faint glow of lights far ahead. A fuel stop near a highway junction. Not large, but enough lighting and activity that it would break the isolation. That became my target. The van was still behind me. Not getting closer. Not falling back. Just staying there. As the lights ahead grew brighter, the van shifted lanes briefly, then returned behind the trailer, almost like they were trying to see past the truck. When the exit ramp came up, I took it without slowing much. The truck rolled down the ramp and toward the fuel station. Bright canopy lights spread across the pavement. Several other trucks were parked near the pumps. As soon as my truck entered the lit area, the van slowed. In the mirror, I watched it roll past the entrance without turning in. It continued down the highway. The headlights disappeared into the darkness. A few seconds later, I pulled the truck into the fuel island and set the brake. For a moment, I just sat there with both hands still on the wheel. The engine idled. The reefer unit hummed steadily behind the cab. Everything sounded normal again. A couple other drivers were walking between trucks nearby, completely unaware of what had almost happened a few miles down the road. I stepped down from the cab and stretched my legs. One of the other drivers glanced over. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just a long stretch of road." That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Because the thing that kept replaying in my mind wasn't the van chasing me. It was how convincing the setup looked from a distance. A broken down vehicle, hazard lights flashing, a woman waving for help on the side of the road. Everything about it was designed to make a driver slow down. And for a few seconds, it worked on me. If my headlights hadn't caught those two silhouettes crouched behind the van at exactly the right moment, I probably would have slowed enough for them to reach the cab. Out on a highway like that, in the middle of the night, there wouldn't have been anyone around to see it happen. This happened to me in April of 2020 at a truck stop outside Memphis, Tennessee. I was hauling a flatbed load of construction materials headed farther east. It had been a long driving day, the kind where you start counting the miles to the next stop just so you can stretch your legs. By the time I rolled into the truck stop, it was well after dark. The fuel island was busy, but not chaotic. A few trucks were lined up, getting diesel. Others were already parked along the edges of the lot with their engines idling while the drivers grabbed food or took a break. I pulled up to an open pump and shut the truck down. The moment the engine stops after hours of driving, you feel the quiet settle into the cab. The vibration fades out, and suddenly the truck feels like it's resting. I climbed down, stretched my back, and started the usual routine. Fuel first, then a quick walk around the truck. Flatbed drivers do that constantly. Chains loosen, tarps shift. Something that looked fine 100 miles ago might need tightening before you get back on the road. While I was walking along the side of the truck, a man approached from the direction of the parking lot. He looked like someone who had been around trucks for a while. Work boots, dark hoodie, grease stains on his jeans. The kind of appearance that blends in easily at a place where a lot of people make their living around heavy equipment. He stopped a few feet away from me and pointed toward the rear of the cab. "You got an air leak," he said. I glanced toward the area he was pointing at. "Where?" I asked. "Back near your lines," he said. "Heard it when you pulled in." Air leaks aren't something you ignore in a truck. Your braking system depends on air pressure. If there's a problem with the lines or fittings, it can become a serious safety issue pretty quickly. Still, I hadn't heard anything unusual when I parked. I listened for a moment. The truck stop was noisy enough that a small leak might have been hard to hear over the engines and compressors around us. "Appreciate the heads up," I said. He nodded toward the rear wheels. Sounded like it was coming from under there. I walked toward the back of the cab to take a look. The man followed a couple steps behind me, pointing again. "Right around that area," he said. I crouched slightly and leaned down to listen near the airlines. Nothing obvious. No steady hissing. No pressure drop that I could tell. Still, sometimes leaks are intermittent. I stepped farther back along the side of the truck, looking under the frame where the lines ran toward the trailer. That's when I noticed movement in the mirror. The reflection caught just enough of the passenger side of the cab to show someone climbing up the steps. For a second, my brain didn't connect what I was seeing. Then it did. Another man had opened the passenger door and was halfway into my truck. I stood up immediately. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. The first man took a quick step back like he had just remembered somewhere else he needed to be. The second man froze in the doorway for a moment, then dropped back down to the pavement. Everything happened in about 2 seconds. The second man took off running between the rows of parked trucks. The first man didn't run right away. He looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. Then he turned and walked quickly toward the far side of the lot. I jogged back to the cab and climbed up the steps, checking the interior. My wallet was still in the center console. My phone was still mounted on the dash. Nothing looked disturbed, but the door had definitely been open. I leaned out of the cab and looked across the truck stop. The man who had been climbing into my truck was already gone. With dozens of trucks and trailers parked in rows, it doesn't take much for someone to disappear into the gaps between them. The other guy who had warned me about the air leak was moving quickly now, heading toward the darker edge of the parking lot. I watched him until he vanished behind a line of trailers. For a moment, I just sat there in the cab. The engine of another truck nearby rumbled loudly as the driver pulled away from the fuel island. The normal activity of the truck stop continued like nothing unusual had happened. I climbed back down and finished checking the airlines. There was no leak, not even a loose fitting. The entire thing had been a distraction. The realization made the situation feel colder. The first guy had approached me with a believable reason to step away from the cab. He knew exactly what to say to get a driver's attention. While I was focused on checking the supposed problem, The second guy moved in from the other side. If I hadn't glanced at the mirror when I did, he would have had the entire cab to himself for several seconds. That's more than enough time to grab a wallet, a phone, or anything else loose inside. I finished fueling and moved the truck to a parking spot under one of the brighter lights. Then I went inside the building and told the cashier what had happened. She nodded in a way that suggested the story wasn't entirely surprising. "People try stuff like that sometimes," she said. "Security will keep an eye out." I grabbed a coffee and headed back out to the truck. The lot looked the same as it had earlier. Rows of trucks, drivers walking around with flashlights checking tires, engines humming in the background, normal activity. But the moment replayed in my head as I climbed back into the cab, the way the first man had pointed under the truck, the timing of the second guy opening the door. It had been organized. They knew exactly how long it takes for a driver to step away from the cab and walk along the truck. They knew where to position themselves so one person could distract while the other moved in. And the part that bothered me the most was how ordinary the whole thing looked at first. A guy pointing out a mechanical problem, something drivers do for each other all the time. Out on the road, most of us try to help when we see something wrong with another truck. That's part of the culture. But standing there in that brightly lit truck stop outside Memphis, it occurred to me how easy it would be for someone to use that instinct against you. All it took was a believable warning and about 5 seconds of your attention pointed in the wrong direction. I had been hauling freight long enough that remote routes didn't bother me. In some ways, I preferred them. Less traffic, fewer impatient drivers cutting in and out around the truck, less nonsense overall. The trade-off, of course, is that when something does go wrong, you can be a long way from help and a long way from light. That stretch outside Moab is the kind of road that reminds you how little there is between towns. Rock, scrub, open dark, and long stretches where your own headlights feel like the only thing separating you from empty land. I was running a routine freight load southbound that night. Nothing high profile, nothing that would draw attention on paper. A standard run, standard trailer, standard schedule. I had fueled earlier, checked my equipment the way I always do, and started that section of the trip feeling fine. The truck was running well. The trailer felt normal. Weather was clear, no strong wind, which mattered out there. The road was mostly empty. That late at night, you might go 10 or 15 minutes with no one around you at all. Then a pickup appears out of nowhere, passes and disappears into darkness ahead. I had settled into that normal rhythm. Gauges, mirrors, road, mirrors again. The kind of driving where your brain is active but quiet. Then I felt the drag. It wasn't dramatic. No loud bang, no tire explosion, no sudden swerve. Just a heavy, resisting pull from the trailer that didn't belong there. Enough to make me come off the throttle and pay full attention immediately. Anyone who's driven long enough knows the difference between road resistance and mechanical resistance. This was not a hill, not rough pavement, not a gust catching the box. It felt like the trailer was suddenly asking more from the truck than it had a second earlier. I checked the mirrors first. No obvious blown tire, no sparks, no shredded tread flapping loose. I checked the trailer brake response by easing off and then lightly adjusting my pressure. Still wrong. The truck wanted to keep going, but the trailer felt like it was fighting me. My first thought was brake trouble, maybe a line issue, maybe something with the trailer air system causing drag, not the kind of problem you ignore and hope sorts itself out. I looked for the next place to stop. That's the issue on roads like that. Stopping is not a simple action. You need enough shoulder to get the trailer clear, enough ground under you that you don't sink or tilt, and ideally enough visibility that you're not just making yourself an easy target for anyone passing through. A few hundred yards ahead, there was a wider section where the shoulder opened up more than usual. Not a rest area, not an official pullout. Just enough room that I could get the rig off the lane without burying the trailer tires in loose gravel. I eased the truck over and brought it to a controlled stop. Hazards on, parking brakes set, engine running. For a few seconds, I sat there with both hands on the wheel, listening to the engine idle. The road looked empty in both mirrors. That helped, but not much. Professional drivers know that roadside inspections at night are sometimes unavoidable. You do them fast, you stay aware, and you don't create more exposure than necessary. That was my mindset when I reached for the flashlight. I stepped down from the cab and immediately felt the temperature difference. It was still warm, but the night air carried that dry desert edge to it. Sound travels strangely out there. Your own footsteps on gravel seem louder than they should. I walked along the side of the truck toward the trailer connections, staying close to the vehicle. That's another habit you build. The truck is cover, light, and a known reference point. If something feels off, you don't wander wide unless you have to. The flashlight beam found the airline almost immediately. It had been cut, not worn through, not burst from age or stress. Cut, a clean slice through the line. I crouched and looked closer to make sure I wasn't misreading it. The edge of the damage was too neat, too deliberate. I've seen enough mechanical failures to know what they look like. They fray, split, rub through, or fail at fittings. This looked like someone had taken a blade to it. I stayed crouched there longer than I should have, mostly because my brain was trying to catch up to what that meant. A cut airline doesn't happen by itself. And if it had been cut intentionally, it wasn't cut here in the middle of nowhere by chance. Someone had done it earlier and trusted I would discover the problem in a place where stopping was unavoidable. That thought had barely finished forming when I saw headlights behind me. A vehicle was approaching from the north. Nothing unusual there at first. Cars pass, trucks pass, but instead of continuing, it slowed and pulled onto the shoulder behind my trailer. That changed the whole feel of the situation instantly. A dark SUV or pickup, I couldn't identify the exact make from that angle, stopped a little too neatly behind me. Not close enough to hit me, close enough to box the back approach. The headlights stayed on, washing the side of the trailer and throwing long shadows across the gravel shoulder. My flashlight was still in my hand. I straightened up slowly and turned enough to watch the vehicle without taking my eyes off it. 2 men got out, not one person leaning out to ask if I needed help. 2 men, both moving quickly and directly toward me. That's the kind of body language you read without having to think about it. They were not uncertain. They were not looking around trying to understand what was wrong. They were approaching like they already knew why I had stopped. One of them called out something that could have passed for, "Everything all right?" if you wanted to hear it that way. I didn't, not after the cut line. I backed toward the cab immediately. I didn't run, but I didn't pretend to stay conversational either. The truck door was still open from when I stepped down, which probably helped me more than anything. I moved fast enough to reach the steps before they closed half the distance. One of the men angled slightly wider, like he was trying to approach the driver's side area from behind me. That was enough. I climbed back into the cab, pulled the door shut, and locked it before either of them reached the truck. The first man came up to the side of the cab and looked in through the window. He had a cap on and a dark jacket. Middle-aged, maybe. Could have passed for a worker or a driver from a distance. That kind of normal appearance didn't make him less dangerous. It made the setup more believable. "You got trouble back there?" he asked. I didn't answer. The second man moved along the side of the truck toward the trailer connection area, then stopped and looked up at me. Neither one seemed surprised that I had gone back to the cab immediately. That told me they had expected resistance, or at least considered it. I grabbed the radio mic and keyed up, giving my location and saying I had a disabled trailer and suspicious individuals approaching my vehicle. My voice came out steady enough. The man at the window watched my hand on the mic. "Need help?" he asked again, louder now, like we were doing a normal roadside interaction. I still didn't answer. I kept the truck running and scanned the road ahead. That's the problem with a disabled trailer setup. Your options shrink fast. The line had been cut. I had drag. I likely didn't have enough clean trailer air function to just pull away normally and forget the damage. But I did have some movement. The truck had gotten this far after the damage showed up. The question was how much I could safely use before turning a bad problem into a worse one. The second man stepped closer to the rear of the cab and looked down toward the line area. He wasn't pretending to inspect it like someone helping. He was checking the position, maybe seeing how much I had already noticed. The first man tapped the window lightly with the back of his knuckles. Not hard, just enough to get attention. I looked straight past him. Another thing people forget about semis is that they're awkward, but they are still large pieces of machinery with weight and force. If you can move at all, sometimes movement itself is your best defense. I released the parking brake and let the truck strain forward slightly. The man at the window stepped back immediately. That told me what I needed to know. He didn't want to be anywhere near the truck if it started rolling. I eased forward another foot. The trailer protested, but it moved. Not cleanly, not happily, but enough. The second man backed away too, looking toward the vehicle behind my trailer. I didn't wait to see if they were deciding something. I put the truck into motion and pulled forward as steadily as I could manage, keeping it on the shoulder at first, then easing back toward the lane. I was not moving fast. The setup wouldn't allow it. But slow motion is still motion, and motion broke whatever easy geometry they had planned. In the mirror, I saw the two men retreat to their vehicle. For a second, I thought they might pull in behind me and continue the pressure. Instead, they stayed parked while I gained distance. Maybe they didn't want to be seen following a damaged truck. Maybe they wanted a driver outside, not a driver sealed in the cab and broadcasting his location. I kept going. The truck felt wrong the entire time. Every second behind the wheel, I was judging whether I had enough control to reach a better lit place or whether I was about to lose the trailer system completely. I reported the airline damage over the radio again and said I was proceeding carefully to a safer stopping point if possible. Dispatch told me law enforcement had been notified and asked if I could identify the vehicle or the individuals. I gave what I had: dark SUV or pickup. 2 adult males. No clear plate. The kind of answer you hate giving because it sounds thin even though it's the truth. A few miles ahead, there was a wider pullout used by service vehicles near a marked turnout. Not ideal, but far better than where I had stopped originally. More visible from the road. More room. Better access if law enforcement or roadside assistance needed to find me. I made it there without losing control of the trailer, though every second felt longer than it should have. When I finally stopped again, I positioned the truck where my lights covered as much open space as possible. Then I stayed in the cab with the doors locked and the engine running. My eyes never stopped moving between the road, the mirrors, and the dark edges beyond the turnout. No vehicle pulled in behind me that time. No headlights approached and stopped. But my body stayed in that narrow alert state where every distant set of lights becomes a question. A deputy arrived first, then service support later. I gave the same explanation twice. Trailer drag, roadside stop, cut airline, suspicious vehicle, 2 men approaching immediately after I discovered the damage. The deputy looked at the line himself and said what I had already concluded. That didn't happen by road wear. He asked if anyone could have had access to the trailer earlier. That question bothered me because the honest answer was yes. Trailers spend time at yards, loading docks, fuel stops, scale queues, places where people are nearby and a driver can't watch every angle at all times. We like to think our equipment is under constant awareness, but the truth is there are always moments when it isn't. The line could have been cut earlier in the route by someone who knew exactly how long it would take before the damage made itself known. That idea sat with me hard afterward, because it meant the ambush didn't really begin when I stopped on Highway 191. It began earlier, somewhere I didn't notice, when someone got close enough to my trailer equipment to set the whole thing up. The repair itself was straightforward once service reached me. The rest of it wasn't. I finished the run later than planned, with reports filed and a much sharper eye on everything around me at every stop that followed. And I changed some habits after that. I started doing more frequent visual checks than I had before, even when the route and the time pressure made them inconvenient. I paid closer attention to who lingered near the trailer at yards and fuel stops. I stopped treating minor irregularities as isolated until I had ruled out the possibility that they were connected to someone else's plan. Because what stayed with me from that night wasn't just the cut line. It was how efficiently the rest of it lined up once I found it. Remote road, limited shoulder, two men arriving before I'd had time to process what I was looking at. That kind of timing isn't luck. If these stories made you rethink driving late at night, you're probably not alone. Smash that like button, subscribe, and tell us which trap looked the most convincing to you. But if your plan after hearing these is just staying home where it's safer, you might want to watch this next video. Click now to watch 4 disturbing home invasion horror stories. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.